Member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member for Saltibus said that he does not understand politicians. And I can sympathize with him. If you're a member of this government, you have to suffer daily confusion. And I can see why you would not understand politicians. I heard the member, and I would wish, Mr. Speaker, if you can ask the honorable member as a former banker, would he ever have approved such a loan? Would he ever have advised a client to take such a loan if he was the banker assessing such a submission? But let me finish. Let me finish.
Cash flow, you know that.
Honorable Member for Castries South, please go ahead, sir.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm hearing a banker saying that his biggest issue in approving a loan is cash flow and not risk. Mr. Speaker, I rest my case. Let's move on. Because I have a lot more regard and respect for the member from Strozel, so we shall let this lie, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is a historic day. Today is a historic day. Never before in the parliamentary history of St. Lucia is a government coming to seek approval to borrow almost $500 million in one sitting. Almost $500 million will be borrowed today. Never before in the history of this parliament. And we've been asked to do so today. So there'll be a lot of debate and discussion today, Mr. Speaker. But before I proceed, Mr. Speaker, and I will say to you, I am against, and I will vote against this motion. I think we need to understand the context in which St. Lucians are watching us in this honorable house and assessing who is going to approve the borrowing of $100 million for the improvement of the Hewanorra International Airport. And the reason why St. Lucians are watching who is going to vote in favor of this motion is because over the last 2.5 years, a tremendous amount of distrust has developed in this country against the government of the day. A tremendous amount of distrust, Mr. Speaker. This is a government, when in opposition, said when we win the elections, there will be no borrowing and there will be no deficit budget in this country. Every single budget has shown otherwise. And so far, this government has borrowed over $400 million according to the estimates that have been tabled in this House. 2 years. And then it was changed and said, we never said no borrowing. We said no borrowing unless we have a revenue stream. But there are other... Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, we came into this honorable house in the last sitting and borrowed $12 million to pay a company to teach us how to do a performance management framework. $13 million. No revenue stream. Tell me where's the revenue stream? And trust me, Mr. Speaker, we can get enough St. Lucian professionals. We can get a lot of regional professionals can help us set up a performance management matrix. We don't have to pay $14 million. But that's beside the point, Mr. Speaker. There was no revenue stream. And we're going to debate another motion, and I will ask, where is the revenue stream? So let us get ready for this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, page 9 of the manifesto. You could make it a document of the House, honorable member. It's already a document of the House. But, Mr. Speaker, the context for this borrowing, this government, when it just came to power, said the country is broke. The country is broke. There's no money in this country. And then what did they proceed to do, Mr. Speaker? Sanders got $24 million waived. And a minister in the Ministry of Finance I'm not sure if he's still there. I'm hearing he's now Minister of the Public Service. And given the new order in St. Lucia now, there's no transparency. He said in another chamber that Sanders was having financial difficulties and they came to the government for help and we waived $24 million for them. It was said words to that effect in another chamber. Or words to the effect. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, but the country was broke. Then, Mr. Speaker, monies were given to CHCTI and the country was broke. Mr. Speaker, monies were given to Ojo Labs. Reflect on that, Mr. Speaker. An investor comes into your country. You sign an agreement with him. You retrofit his factory shell for him. You agree to pay his monthly recurrent expenditure. You agree to pay his salaries for him. And, Mr. Speaker, the country was broke. The country was broke, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, I have no difficulties with questioning government's policy, but when the attempt is to mislead the House, I have to stand up. The Ojo deal is a very simple deal, and we've made it very clear on all of our documentation. All we're doing is paying $500 a month on the salaries for a period of 18 months. We are not involved in the operations of Ojo Labs. We do not pay the electricity bill at Ojo Labs. We do not pay their salaries. All of the salaries are paid for by Ojo Labs. And so for every new person working at Ojo Labs, Mr. Speaker, each person is offered in the first 6 months $1,000. In the second 6 months is $500, and a third period of $500. That is all. So at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, okay, the government is not involved in the operations. The salaries are being paid for by Ojo. And I'm very happy to report, Mr. Speaker, that today, as we speak, there's over 250 young people operating. So just for the point of hallucination,
very well.
Come on, this is unacceptable,
the member
Mr.
from
Speaker.
Castries East
Mr.
can
Speaker.
refrain from continuing to
I will. Honourable Member for Castries South, the Prime Minister has indicated the extent to which government is involved in the Ojo Labs operation. Don't go beyond that. So in terms of ascribing to government more obligations that they have.
Mr. Speaker, you are fully aware, Mr. Speaker, that it is a grave offense to Parliament for a minister to mislead Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you are aware in other jurisdictions, ministers have had to resign for lying to misleading Parliament. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has stood here in this House today and said the only thing government has done and is doing for Ojo Labs is to pay $500 a month for some workers. That's what the Prime Minister has said to this Honourable House. And I want to know who paid for the retrofitting of the Ojo Lab factory shell. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Castries South, you've heard what the Prime Minister has indicated. If you have any other evidence, you will deal with that subsequently. As for now, I am saying to you, heard what the Prime Minister has indicated. Please keep to within. He has indicated that his obligation as government is only so far. All right, unless you have further, then keep to what is within
Mr. Speaker,
our knowledge.
he just admitted that investors should pay to the retrofitting. But anyway, let's move on, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is a serious issue. The information that is provided in this Honourable House is a serious matter, and especially when it comes from a minister. But Mr. Speaker, Tato. Mr. Speaker, the country was broke, but money is found to pay for a road for DSH. Mr. Speaker, it was broke. And this is the context in which we are going to borrow $500 million today, or almost. Mr. Speaker, there is a distrust. There's a distrust in the CIP, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the correct procedure is. This document was not tabled this morning, the CIP report. But it was circulated, and it was in my official documents, and it was listed as a document that should have been tabled. Maybe I missed it, but I cannot recall it being tabled. But I want to quote from it, Mr. Speaker, because I want to highlight the distrust as the context in which the borrowing is taking place, Mr. Speaker. You want me to sit? With your permission, can I quote from it? If not, I'll put it away.
Because there was, that's the honest truth, I received a note during the course of the morning. There was an error and that the HIA should be tabled, so note was sent to the Prime Minister that will be done.
I'll move on.
Before the end of the day.
Yes.
So it is an error on our part.
I thought it would have been done immediately after the member from Strozel spoke. Because, Mr. Speaker, the distrust is sometimes in the information that's provided to Parliament and in the public. Mr. Speaker, according to the documents, it showed, and I don't want to be wrong, so I probably need to refer to it, Mr. Speaker, but let's just say, not more than $30 million was transferred from the National Economic Fund, from CIP to the National Economic Fund. Not more than about $30 million. But we heard from a minister, the member for Ancillary Canaries, that in the range fiasco, over $54 million was collected. Over $54 million was collected through donations. But if over $54 million was collected for donations, how come CIP is recording no more than $30-odd million transferred since April 2017? Since April 2017, Mr. Speaker. And there will come a time when we will have a public discourse on the CIP report, because there are a lot of questions I want to ask on that, because there's distrust. And people and citizens, constituents in St. Lucia, are looking at this sitting of Parliament to see who says what, Mr. Speaker. But we've moved on. The country is booming now, Mr. Speaker. Growth rate sky high. The member from Babono sat in the last sitting and said we had achieved growth rates of 12%. And again, Mr. Speaker, I stood up and I said this is incorrect. And you know what was done? A copy of the page from the Social and Economic Report was printed and circulated showing GDP nominal prices.
No, that's constant prices.
No, Mr. Speaker. Yet, Mr. Speaker, the House and the public being misled. But, Mr. Speaker, let's just take his word for it. The country is booming now.
Don't say, honorable member of Castries South, that the House and the public was misled. The member presented documents from the Economic and Social Review at a particular cost, I think, or at a particular price. I cannot remember from now, but at a particular price. It was all within your right and any member's right to question the member at the time.
I did.
Okay? But don't say he misled Parliament at that particular
Mr.
point
Speaker,
in time.
I did interject. I did say that was
I'm not saying no, but it
Yeah.
was circulated thereafter. But to say now that he misled Parliament, I'm saying just don't use that phrase.
Mr. Speaker, if you say something, you ask me proof.
Because, honorable member, when he said that there was growth rate at 12% and he got it from the Economic Review, he actually got it from the book. Whether it was not at the right price or he quoted the figures that did not reflect what it ought to be, the fact is he got it and he said where he got it. So I'm saying don't say he misled the House. That's
Okay,
all.
Mr. Speaker, just for the record, you don't measure economic growth by GDP in nominal prices. But let's move on, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the country is booming. And we're coming here to borrow almost $500 million. But workers have been asked to take $1,000 bonus this month, to take a bonus of $1,000 this month and give up all their salary increases retroactive for the last few years that are owed to them. And to start negotiations at the same base. But the country is booming, Mr. Speaker. And in all the booming that's taking place in the country, Sandals got 24 million,
Honorable
Ojo Lab
member for
got 10
Castries
million.
South. Just have a honorable leader of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition and Member for Babonop, I would like to hear our good friend from and Member for Castries South, please. Continue, good sir.
So the country is booming, Mr. Speaker. And workers have been asked to take $1,000. And you know what's insulting about it? They've been told to take it before Christmas so you can spend it for Christmas. Listen to this. Take it for Christmas so you can spend it for Christmas. And in January, they're back to the same base level of their salary. But if it is booming, Mr. Speaker, and I would not object to it, give the workers a bonus of the boom. Give them a bonus of the boom. Do not make them give up their retroactive payments and their salary increases. For that, do like St. Kitts. But don't tell them to give up their retroactive payments, which would be more than $1,000, and to say you're giving it to them before Christmas so they can spend it. So, Mr. Speaker, the country is booming. But I'll tell you something, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the member from ancillary Canaries. No, Mr. Speaker, I can continue.
Honorable members,
Yeah.
please allow me to hear the member for Castries South. Very well.
So, Mr. Speaker, and I heard the member from ancillary Canaries, and he came to deliver a minister's statement, and I hope someday the standing orders can be revised to allow at least one response to minister's statements. But you notice today, there was no talk of arrivals. And the levels, the arrival figures, nothing about that. No update on the hotels that have been constructed and why certain hotels have stopped and projects have stopped. Nothing like that today. He's going to announce with the best honeymoon destination in the world, something we have gone so many times in the past. So many times in the past. But, Mr. Speaker, I wish that honorable member would speak about the salary level of workers in the hospitality sector. Because this country is booming. And if this country is booming and hospitality is driving it, are the workers benefiting from it? But that's another debate for another day. So, Mr. Speaker, you know what hurts me in all the booming that's taking place? It's the suffering of people in Fuasho, Monkey Tongue, Tikolo, Basse Joseph Marigo, throughout the constituency. They're not enjoying the booming. They're not enjoying the booming, despite the number of CDP projects being undertaken in Castries South. Persons from outside, a neighboring constituency, gets all the contracts. Mr. Speaker, it's booming, and persons are getting step work, but certain people are getting it. There's somebody who runs a bakery who is supervisor for STEP. There's a person with a doctorate who's a supervisor in STEP, Mr. Speaker. So it's booming, Mr. Speaker, but it's only some people. And Mr. Speaker, the member from Castries office says what goes around comes around. He stood in this house and he said, y'all have not started crying yet. And I will say, Mr. Speaker, to the people of this country, do not cry. Be strong. Do not whine. Do not pine. Do not cry. That's my job to do it for them. But I don't want them to cry. I want them to be strong. Because the discrimination and the victimization will come to an end. But the country is booming, Mr. Speaker. It is booming. But, Mr. Speaker, we've been asked, Mr. Speaker, to approve borrowing for a project that no one in here on this side has seen. No one in the public has seen. Can you imagine a banker recommending and approving a loan for someone? You're asked to approve, you're going to go and take a loan to build a house. You've never seen the house. You know nothing like what it looks. And you've been asked to approve that motion today. I have never seen what the new terminal will look like. Never. Never, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister announced how it has been changed and terminal moves there and this moves there. If all those changes are taking place now, Mr. Speaker, how much is the project really going to cost? How are we taking a loan, coming in here to approve a motion? We don't even know what's the final cost of the project. We don't know. We heard it's 175 million. The bank from Taiwan will be giving 100 million, and a local consortium will be getting 75 million. But the Prime Minister did not say so this morning. And I would want the Prime Minister in his rebuttal to explain to the people of St. Lucia exactly how much the project will cost. Explain that to us. Also now, okay, it's been confirmed now that the project will cost 175 million. If we have been asked to approve a motion to borrow 100 million US dollars, can someone explain how this will be managed, how it will be financed? If there is a line of financing that is going to cover the 100 million, what will cover the other 75 million? Listen to me, Mr. Speaker. We are told that the revenue stream will cover the 100 million. So will it also cover the additional 75 million? Mr. Speaker, there has to be transparency in this regard, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is something very disturbing. No, Mr. Speaker, you know, this is a serious matter. This is not a joke matter. We can't just dismiss it. You cannot come to this honorable house, ask us to borrow the largest single loan in the history of this country, and deal with it in a flippant manner. In a flippant manner. You asking to approve a borrowing and we don't even know what the project looks like. We do not even know what's the final cost of the project. And you're going to say, we said it. You've not given us in a detailed, concise way how much it costs, how it will be paid. You do not do that in a flippant way. This is the largest single infrastructural project that will ever be undertaken in St. Lucia. The debt of this project, Mr. Speaker, will linger on for years. Will linger on for years. And you expect me to walk in. And Mr. Speaker, not for 30 years. Listen, the member for Strozel said he's confused. And he's really confused. Because 30 years is too long to lease the airport. But the Cayman Health Project Agreement speaks of Cayman Health having a 30-year contract in St. Lucia. A 30-year contract. So, it's too long to lease the airport that will incur no debt to us. But the same gentleman will sit in Parliament and agree to Cayman Health getting a 30-year lease on OKEU. Can you believe this, Mr. Speaker? Now you understand why the member from Strozel, Saltibus, is confused and you don't understand politicians. Mr. Speaker, somebody has to answer the question, why would you reject the PPP arrangement you found in place? And the member from Castries went into detail, Mr. Speaker. In detail. Why would you ask the people of St. Lucia to borrow 175 million US dollars, almost $500 million, when you had an alternative where there would be no debt on the books of St. Lucia? Even if in your analysis you believe that dollar for dollar you could have gained more if you owned it over the 30 years. But the risk of the loan and the effect on the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, has to tell you that there's a disturbing answer why the PPP was abandoned, Mr. Speaker. There has to be. Jamaica already had an airport in the PPP. They moved Norman Manley in the same way it was proposed in St. Lucia all over the world. Projects, airports are being managed and financed in that particular way. Mr. Speaker, why in St. Lucia we are moving from that? Who has convinced the Cabinet of Ministers that it is better? What is the reasoning for it? And Mr. Speaker, it takes us to the last attempt under the last United Workers' Party government. Because the project then, and the Honorable Member from Castries said it was mired in controversy and suspicious activity. And Mr. Speaker, there is a report that details it. And Mr. Speaker, the whistleblowers put it online, and St. Lucians were able to read it for themselves. Both the member for Castries Southeast and the member for Mico South were involved in numerous activities which some can suspect, some can believe were suspicious, Mr. Speaker. And the Prime Minister himself announced that he will undertake an investigation into the allegations. We've heard nothing about that investigation. Nothing about that investigation. So there you had a project that was mired in controversy and suspicion, Mr. Speaker. A local talk show host openly said that he was offered millions of dollars to vote in favor of it by a member who sits in this house. He's never been sued today. And people are suing people all over the place these days. The mayor, I heard, suing somebody, another talk show host, for saying certain things. The mayor himself suing a councillor for calling him certain things. The member from Microsoft suing the same talk show host for saying certain things about him. But that talk show host was not sued for saying he was offered millions to sign the agreement. Mr. Speaker, there are too many unanswered questions about the last attempt to build, to improve the Hewanorra International Airport. Too many. I would have felt a lot better if the Prime Minister had released the details of his investigation, and for me to feel comforted as a parliamentary rep representing my constituents that nothing untold happened in the last attempt under the United Workers' Party government. But we don't know. And today you're asking us, against all logic, against all reasonable thinking, you've given up a PPP to take a loan of 175 million, and for us to believe we should just approve it, Mr. Speaker? No, Mr. Speaker. For me, there's a lot more that has to be answered. I need to know, Mr. Speaker, what are the guarantees that this project will not be corrupted, will not be used for the wrong reasons, Mr. Speaker? As a parliamentarian, I need to get that assurance, and I don't have it, and I don't feel comfortable, Mr. Speaker. When I read that report, Mr. Speaker, when I read that report which was published online, Mr. Speaker, it gave me the shudders, Mr. Speaker. The shudders. And I want to be assured, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to go on to say a few more things, Mr. Speaker. In the motion, Mr. Speaker, it says, under be it further resolved, E, the terms and conditions proposed by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan, are accepted. What are those terms and conditions? What are those terms and conditions that are accepted? We are asked to come in here and approve a motion for borrowing the largest single amount of money in the history of St. Lucia, and asked to approve a motion that says to me that the terms and conditions are accepted. How can I accept terms and conditions that I don't know? How can you expect me to sit here and vote? And how can any member on the other side sit here and vote that he's accepting the terms and conditions of the loan and it has not been made public? How can St. Lucians sit and be satisfied with the conduct of their parliamentary representatives approving the largest loan in the history of St. Lucia, and they, the constituents, don't even know what the terms and conditions are?
Mr. Speaker,
Yes,
I
Mr.
stand on an order again.
But
The
if
member,
A to
the
D
member
what they
from
wouldn't have
Castries
it as
South
E.
continues to mislead this House. The entity that is responsible for negotiating the terms is SLASPA with regards to the construction of the property. SLASPA has a separate and independent board. SLASPA has agreed to the loan conditions. What we are coming to this House for is because we are providing a guarantee to that loan. And the terms of the loan have been spelled out in the document, Mr. Speaker. That is what we're here for. We're not here to approve the content of the airport, how the airport is going to be designed. That is the role of SLASPA, which is an independent entity, has its
Very well,
own
Mr. Prime.
board. That is their responsibility.
Very
And the
well.
member
Very well.
must stop misleading the House as if we're doing anything else other than
Mr.
providing
Prime.
the guarantee to the loan.
Very well. I keep saying Mr. Member for Castries South, sir. You may continue, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the motion asks me to approve, to vote yes, that the terms and conditions are accepted. I'm sorry, I cannot, Mr. Speaker. I cannot, Mr. Speaker. I don't know whether the Prime Minister has a difficulty with reading, Mr. Speaker. You know, I have, Mr. Speaker, can I read what's in the motion?
Yes, yes.
The terms and conditions propose by the Export-Import Bank of the Republic of China, Taiwan are accepted. The terms and conditions proposed by, how can I vote yes that I accept those terms and conditions when I've never seen them? The public has never seen them.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The terms and the conditions of the loan, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I continue? Because the Prime Minister is getting a little flustered. And so let's go on, Mr. Speaker. Trying to help me. The suspicion is on you, Honorable Member.
Honorable Member for Castries South. Honorable Member for Castries South. I have made my ruling. I've asked you to continue.
Okay, so Mr. Speaker, I don't know what the terms and conditions are, Mr. Speaker, but I am concerned about the transparency, Mr. Speaker. I am concerned about...
Mr. Let's clarify something here. Mr. Prime Minister, it is within the member's right to question the motion as so tabled.
Mr. Speaker, the member is saying he doesn't know what he's voting for, Mr. Speaker. It says right here, be it further resolved that the loan is repayable over a period of 20 years from the date of the first disbursement. The interest is payable at a rate of 6 months, London Interbank offered plus rates. The loan payment shall commence
Mr.
after
Prime
the grace
Minister,
period.
I have no issue with what you're indicating. It is clearly within the member's right to question the motion as so presented. I am not going to take that right away from him.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister have a difficulty in the way I present it, let me present it differently to him. If you look at the motion for the borrowing from the Bank of St. Lucia, do you see that clause included for Bank of St. Lucia? Can you just find for me?
Member for Castries South.
Because,
we're dealing with one motion at a time, sir.
Sorry?
We're dealing with one motion at a time,
yes,
sir.
Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making is in no other instance of borrowing is such a provision included in the motion. This is the first time I am seeing before this Honorable House, in any motion, members being asked to accept terms and conditions of a loan that they have not seen. In the other motions, that's not included, Mr. Speaker. This is something unusual. And therefore, I have a right as the Honorable Representative of the people of Castries to ask, what are those terms and conditions? I have a right to ask that. If it was a normal way of drafting motions, I can understand I've been told that's standard wording. But this is not standard wording. And therefore, I have a right to ask, what are the terms and conditions? Mr. Speaker, I've been interrupted many times, and I suspect you might soon tell me I have very few minutes left. So I hope you take into account the numerous troublesome interruptions that took place. Mr. Speaker, because I'm leading to the point about transparency in the process, Mr. Speaker. I'm hearing, and I'm not sure whether I heard it in here, that there's already a contractor for the project. There's already a contractor for the project. Was there any international tendering for a contractor for the project? Was there any international tendering? The member for Castries East pointed out that we followed IFC guidelines, tendering and procurement guidelines to select somebody. So, was there international tendering for the contractor for this project? And if there were, can the minister responsible for SLASPA table it in this house so we can see the tendering process that was followed? And I want to know whether or not the terms and conditions that are accepted here today, it included non-tendering. I want to know. Because I expect the largest single borrowing in the history of St. Lucia, the largest sum we've ever come to this parliament to approve. There should be transparency, Mr. Speaker. I cannot be wrong, Mr. Speaker, in not asking for transparency in approving this loan. This is a serious matter, Mr. Speaker. And for any member to suggest to me that I'm a nuisance for asking for transparency, it's regrettable. What was the tendering process used? Tell us, Mr. Speaker. How is it that there's already a contractor? Tell us. Then if it is a bank condition, tell us what those terms and conditions are. You see exactly what I am saying, Mr. Speaker. I'm now being told that's a bank condition. Is there a bank condition on that the contractor must be selected by the bank? And why are we taking a loan that the bank tells us they will select the contractor and not us?
If that is so.
If that is so. If that is so. Mr. Speaker, what are the other terms and conditions? How are the subcontractors going to be selected?
Secret.
And there were officials from the Embassy of Taiwan here, and they've left. But, Mr. Speaker,
Call him back, call him back.
in a previous life, under a previous UWP administration, monies from the Republic of Taiwan, Mr. Speaker, was known to be involved in some very suspect activities. And as a result, there is a Tongan Village Council's report that outlined how every member, and was openly stated by a former representative of Miku North, who said each of them got $1 million a year, and it's a document at the House. Mr. Speaker, I believe between 2011 and 2016, that kind of situation in Taiwan, I thought we had moved past that, and we introduced the necessity for transparency and accountability in how monies are used. And I hope that this project will not reintroduce that kind of behavior in the politics of St. Lucia. We need to know, Mr. Speaker, what are the tendering rules that will guide the implementation of this project, Mr. Speaker? Because $175 million loan, $500 million loan, Mr. Speaker, is no easy amount of money.
Honorable member, and now I think you just crossed that line because I have no borrowing, no motion before me to borrow $175 million. So withdraw just that part of it, sir.
Well,
Minus 75.
minus 75.
For the time being.
So we have borrowed for $100 million, Mr. Speaker. Very astute of you to recognize my error. But the other 75 will come to debate it, and then I will repeat myself, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I cannot support this motion. I cannot support this motion, Mr. Speaker. I support the improvements to the Hewanorra International Airport. It was a project that have started a very long time ago. It continued under the Stevens, the member from Castries North administration. It continued under the member from Beaufort South administration. And Mr. Speaker, it is back before us. But it's back before us under circumstances, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honorable member shouts that we will do it. And I'll tell you why. Let me comment on that, Mr. Speaker. There is a notion that anything can be done anyhow under suspect conditions, compromised conditions, but once we do it, it's okay for the people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, that's a very dangerous notion. That's a very dangerous notion. That once we do it, even if a road costs $2 million, but we take a loan for $10 million, but we build a road so y'all should be happy. This Bradwash Bridge, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, the honorable member is feeding me. Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members. Honorable members. Leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition. I know he's not hearing me, but I want him to hear. Leader of the opposition, please, sir. Honorable member for Castries South.
Can I continue?
Do not take the bait, sir.
No,
what before you is HIA.
No. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you why, because I had forgotten to make that point. So the member just reminded me. Because when I spoke about the context and the distrust, a bridge which we were criticized for costing 15 million, another 11. There's another bridge to be built with less specs will cost 40 million. 41 million. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to mention that to show you why there is so much distrust in this government. The Bradwash Bridge for 11 million was severely criticized. And now another bridge of lesser specs will cost $41 million. And you know what they're saying to the people? Just be happy because you have a bridge. Forget it costs 4 times what it should have cost, then, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker,
Honorable members. Honorable member for Castries South. It seems like I would have to put a ring around you just to hear you. Members on the opposition side. Honorable member for Beaufort South, please, sir, just remain. And member for Barbono, just remain on the... I would like to hear the member for Castries South. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I don't mind a few more shout-outs because there are a few things I've forgotten, I'm sure of, so remind me. But, Mr. Speaker, on a serious note, we have secondary schools being closed in St. Lucia. We have a healthcare crisis, Mr. Speaker. We have so much that is wrong in this country that was supposed to be fixed. The people were promised they were going to be fixed. They've been made worse, Mr. Speaker. And we've been asked today to borrow $100 million US, Mr. Speaker. When if we had to borrow $100 million US, Mr. Speaker, it can be used to solve a lot of other problems in this country, especially if we have the other option of a PPP, where we do not have to spend for building the airport, Mr. Speaker. And when I am asked, Mr. Speaker, with all the distrust in this government, to approve this motion, and especially when it has a condition that says the terms and conditions are accepted, Mr. Speaker, I cannot do so. I support the improvement of the Hewanorra International Airport, but I cannot support this motion for borrowing $100 million US from the Import-Export Bank of Taiwan. Thank you very much.